Um, Imagine for a second that you're just like walking down the street, right?
Yeah.
And you find a magic APM.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. So it's glowing, it looks really inviting, and there's this sign on it guaranteeing to grow your wealth.
Sounds like a scam, but go on.
Yeah, exactly. But you pull out a crisp $1 bill anyway,
Yeah.
and you deposit it into the slot. But instead of your balance going up by $1, or maybe $1.10 with some magical interest, the machine just whirs, grinds, and literally destroys 73 cents of your money.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It only credits your account with 27 cents. So let me ask you, would you ever, in a million years, keep depositing your hard-earned money into that machine?
I mean, no. Anyone in their right mind would run the other way. You'd call the authorities. I mean, it's the absolute definition of a wealth-destroying mechanism.
Right. You'd run away. Yet for like 3 decades, a massive, highly advanced global economy did exactly this.
Yeah, and they didn't just do it once by mistake either.
No. They fed trillions of yen into a machine that was destroying over 70% of their wealth, relentlessly, year after year.
It's just wild to think about.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into this ultimate economic mystery. Japan's lost decades, or, the Heisei era stagnation.
And we're unpacking a really bombshell paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research that finally explains why that machine broke.
Yes. It's by Berkeley professors Alan J. Auerbach and Yuriy Gorodnichenko, called Fiscal Multipliers in Japan.
And they pulled apart like half a century of raw data. What they found, honestly, it fundamentally rewrites our understanding of government intervention.
Totally. We're looking at a scenario where the standard rules of economic gravity just, they stop working.
Right. And if you are listening to this right now thinking, why should I care about Japanese economic data from the 90s?
Yeah, fair question.
Well, just look around you. We've got skyrocketing national debt, aging populations, sluggish growth. The ghost of Japan's stagnation is literally wandering the halls of treasuries around the world right now.
Are we making the exact same fatal mistakes today? That's what we want to find out.
Let's trace the money.
Right.
Because we have to start with the sheer scale of this paradox.
Right. When you look at the charts for Japan, stretching from 1985 all the way to 2012, you just see this climbing trend line of their debt-to-GDP ratio.
It's a mountain that just keeps going up.
Yeah, they were frantically pumping money into the system to stimulate growth.
Which leads us to the ultimate, slap-in-the-face statistic from this research.
Lay it on us.
Over that nearly 30-year period, the average fiscal multiplier for Japan was merely 0.27.
Wow. That is your broken ATM right there.
Exactly.
Okay, let's actually unpack the machinery of a fiscal multiplier because, economists throw that term around in the news constantly.
To do, yeah.
So if the government passes a billion-yen stimulus, how is that supposed to multiply? Like, trace a single yen for me.
Okay, so at its core, the fiscal multiplier measures a chain reaction. Let's say the government borrows a yen and pays a construction firm to build a new bridge.
Okay, that's the initial injection.
Right. But the money doesn't stop there. The construction worker takes their wages and buys groceries.
Right.
Then the grocer uses that profit to buy a new delivery truck. The truck manufacturer hires more engineers.
It ripples out.
Exactly. In a healthy economic model, that single yen of government spending acts as a catalyst. It's supposed to create more than a yen's worth of total economic activity.
You always want a multiplier greater than 1.0?
Yes, you want a multiplier of 1.5 or 2 or even higher.
It's supposed to be an engine. Like you put in a gallon of gas, the engine combusts it, and you get forward momentum.
But a multiplier of 0.27 means the engine block is cracked. It means that for every 1 unit of currency the government injected through fiscal stimulus, over 0.7 units of wealth completely evaporated.
It didn't ripple at all.
No, it was absorbed and neutralized.
And this just absolutely shatters the traditional Keynesian assumption, right? I mean, the whole playbook we've been taught since the Great Depression is that government spending is the guaranteed magic bullet.
Right, the idea that if the private sector is slowing down, the government just opens the taps and fills the bathtub.
But this paper shows that in Japan, during this era, the government wasn't just being inefficient. They were actively destroying wealth by trying to save it.
It really forces us into a very uncomfortable corner. I mean, if the medicine the government stimulus is actively harming the patient, we have to interrogate the doctors.
Yeah. Did the policymakers even diagnose the disease correctly in the first place?
Which leads to the second massive revelation here, the illusion of measurement.
This part blew my mind. You'd think the government just applied the stimulus at the wrong time?
We don't think so.
But Auerbach and Gorodnichenko point out something truly counterintuitive. In a stagnant post-bubble economy like Japan's, it became almost impossible for anyone to even define what a recession was.
Which sounds completely absurd to a layperson. We assume that central banks and top economists have a clear binary definition, like you are either growing or you are shrinking.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that top economists, looking at the exact same country with the exact same employment and GDP data, couldn't agree if the economy was in a recession?
Exactly, because diagnosing an economy depends entirely on what you consider normal.
Right, your baseline.
To prove this, the authors tested 3 different standard macroeconomic indicators to measure the state of Japan's business cycle.
Okay, what were they?
The first indicator is called Y, which basically measures how far the absolute level of total output deviates from its long-term trend.
Okay, output trend, got it.
The second was DY, which looks at how far the growth rate deviates from its trend.
Growth rate, okay.
And the third was called RES, which simply compared the current growth to the historical average growth rate from the golden era before 1990.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm visualizing this. It's basically like using 3 different thermometers on a patient in a hospital bed to figure out if they need emergency surgery.
Yes. And the jaw-dropping finding in the paper is that those 3 thermometers often gave completely contradictory probabilities of Japan being in a recession at the exact same time.
Wait, really?
Yes.
So, like, thermometer Y says the patient has a raging fever of 104 degrees and is dying.
Right.
Thermometer DY says they have severe hypothermia, and thermometer RES says they are perfectly healthy.
Exactly.
How does the math actually trick the economist here? I don't get it.
Well, let's look at the mechanics of separating the trend from the cycle. Japan had this massive historic catch-up growth after World War II. They were an absolute juggernaut.
Right, the economic miracle.
But then the asset bubble collapsed in the early 90s, and their growth basically flatlined.
Right.
So if you are a policymaker in the year 2005 looking at this flatline, you have a philosophical math problem. Is this low growth just the new normal trend?
Because the population is rapidly aging, right.
Exactly, because the post-war boom is naturally over. Or is this a massive, prolonged recession where millions of resources are just being wasted?
Ah, I see. So depending on which baseline you use, you get a totally different reality. If I compare the year 2005 to the glory days of the 1980s, it looks like a terrifying, endless depression.
But if you adjust your trend line to account for an aging society that really shouldn't be growing fast anyway, that exact same economic data looks like a mild, steady expansion. There's no output gap.
Wow. If the doctors can't even agree if the patient is sick, how are they supposed to prescribe billions of yen in stimulus?
They can't do it accurately, and this diagnostic nightmare is exactly why the authors of this paper had to abandon standard economic methodology just to get an accurate read on the data.
They had to throw out the old playbook.
Completely. They threw out the traditional approach, which is called a structural vector autoregression, or SVR model.
Okay, let's actually look at the machinery of this SVR model.
Yeah.
Why did it fail so badly here?
So an autoregressive model fundamentally assumes that the future is a strict mathematical function of the past. It's highly rigid. If you apply a shock to the system, like a sudden burst of government spending, the SVR model assumes it knows exactly how the economy will react over time based on strict historical averages.
So it basically forces the messy, chaotic reality of human behavior onto a dead, preset train track.
That's a great way to put it. And if the economy undergoes a massive structural change like Japan did when its bubble burst, the train track leads you right off a cliff.
Because the historical averages just don't apply anymore.
Exactly. So instead of SVAR, the authors used something called the local projections method. It was developed by Esker Jorda.
How does local projections fix the train track problem? Does it just, like, build a new track?
It doesn't use a track at all.
Oh.
It calculates the reaction at every single step forward independently. It allows the multiplier to adapt smoothly and dynamically.
So it's simulating the real on-the-ground transmission of money.
Right. If the economy suddenly transitions from a recession to an expansion right in the middle of a 2-year stimulus rollout, the local projections method catches that nonlinearity.
So the SVR model is like looking at a static photograph of a patient and guessing how their heart will beat tomorrow based on yesterday.
Yeah.
But local projections is hooking them up to a continuous real-time heart monitor.
And that real-time monitor is what allowed the researchers to cut through the statistical noise and uncover the stark contrast between Japan's golden age and its subsequent collapse.
Right, because we have to give some context here. Japan wasn't always a broken ATM.
not at all.
Between 1960 and 2012, if you take the entire 50-year picture, the average multiplier was actually a massive 2.30, and the linear maximum hit 1.74.
Those are phenomenal numbers. A multiplier of 2.3 is the Keynesian dream fully realized. The government spends a yen, and it generates a 2.3 yen of wealth.
But the real insight from the paper isn't just the high average, is it? It's that even during the golden years, the multiplier fluctuated wildly based on the exact moment the government decided to pull the trigger.
Timing is absolute destiny in fiscal policy. This is what we call the ice and fire dynamic.
Okay, break that down.
The authors found that during economic expansions, when the economy was running hot and private businesses were thriving, the fiscal multiplier was historically quite low.
Well, let's think about the mechanics of that. If the economy is booming, unemployment is near zero, and every cement factory is running at 100% capacity.
Right.
Then the government suddenly decides to spend 1 billion yen to build a new high-speed rail line. They can't magically summon unemployed workers or spare cement because there aren't any.
They have to steal them.
Wait, steal them?
Yeah. To build the rail line, the government has to offer higher wages to lure construction workers away from building private housing. They buy up all the cement that would have gone to a new Sony or Toyota factory.
So they aren't creating new growth at all. They're just shifting resources from the private sector to the public sector.
It's a pure crowding out effect. But when the economy plummeted into a deep, icy recession, the dynamic completely flipped.
Right.
During a severe downturn, the multiplier could skyrocket to an astonishing 3.55.
3.55. So during a real crisis, $1 injected could create over $3.50 of total wealth.
Because suddenly you have massive slack.
You have idle factories, empty delivery trucks, unemployed workers sitting at home.
Exactly. The government spending acts as the spark that remobilizes all those dormant resources.
Okay, so that was the magic. But here is where the story turns into a tragedy. The paper pinpoints a watershed moment around 1985.
Yes, 1985 changed everything.
After that year, the structural integrity of the Japanese economy fundamentally warped. The baseline average multiplier crashed to that pathetic 0.27.
The magic just evaporated.
But surely, I'm thinking, when the massive 90s crash happened and Japan entered a severe recession, that magical 3.55 crisis multiplier would kick back in to save the day, right?
You would certainly hope so.
Because the economy was freezing cold, so the spark should have worked.
That's what the policymakers assumed. But the data reveals something terrifying. After 1985, the recession multiplier also degraded severely. It dropped down to around 2.25, and critically, its standard errors exploded. It lost its statistical certainty.
The ultimate break the glass, life-saving adrenaline needle stopped working even when the patient was coding on the table.
They slammed the needle into the chest, and the heart just kept failing.
This is the central mystery of the paper. What invisible force was strangling the policy? If the money was actively being spent by the Treasury, why was it evaporating before it could create growth?
To solve that, we have to pivot from looking at the government to looking at the citizens receiving the money.
Okay.
The paper introduces this incredible concept of the public's crystal ball.
The crystal ball. This touches on the curse of expectations. Right?
Yes. Historically, macroeconomic models treated citizens like passive receptacles.
Like spreadsheet cells.
Exactly. A spreadsheet assumes the government spends money, the citizens receive a check, and they blindly go to the store and spend it. But citizens are not spreadsheet cells.
No, they are highly attuned, anxious human beings.
They read the financial news, they understand patterns.
So the researchers realized that analyzing the raw data of government spending was missing a massive piece of the puzzle.
They didn't just track what the government actually spent. They tracked what real-time professional forecasters like the OECD and the IMF predicted the government was going to spend.
It's such a brilliant methodological pivot. When a policy is heavily telegraphed in the press, the public completely digests it before the money even leaves the Treasury.
Right. Think about it. If the Prime Minister holds a press conference in January announcing a massive stimulus package, but the actual funds won't hit the economy until July.
The financial markets and the corporate sector adjust their behavior in February.
Precisely. By the time the cash arrives in July, it's stale. It doesn't shock the system into movement because everyone already priced it in.
So Auerbach and Gorodnichenko used those OECD and IMF forecasts to mathematically strip out all the expected government spending from their data set.
They purified the data. They isolated only the true, unexpected financial shocks, the spending that caught the public completely by surprise.
Now, human nature would suggest that if you isolate the pure, unexpected shock, The multiplier should shoot up, right?
That is the logical assumption.
Because it catches people off guard and forces a sudden flurry of economic activity. I would guess the multiplier jumps back up to maybe 1.5 or 2.
But the data reveals a completely anti-common sense reality.
Brace yourselves for this.
When you strip out the public's expectations, the multiplier didn't recover. It actually dropped to a cumulative negative 0.23.
Wait, I need to pause on that.
Yeah.
A negative 0.23 multiplier.
Yes.
The government spends $1 to help the economy, and the economy actually shrinks by 23 cents.
That's what the data shows.
How is that physically possible?
Put yourself in the shoes of a Japanese citizen in 1995. You are watching the news. The national debt is skyrocketing.
Okay.
The government announces yet another unexpected multi-billion yen stimulus package. Fundamentally that the government has no money of its own.
Right. It only has the money it takes from me.
Exactly. So if they promise you free money today, what are they mathematically forced to do tomorrow?
They have to raise my taxes to pay off the debt they just took on.
This brings us to the mechanics of Ricardian equivalence.
Right.
The public sees the stimulus check arriving in the mail, but they also see the invisible looming tax bill attached to it that will inevitably come due in 5 or 10 years.
So what do they do with that stimulus check? I mean, I don't go buy a new TV. I take that check and I immediately lock it in my savings account because I need to hoard cash to pay for the future tax hikes.
Exactly. The Japanese public became too smart for their own good. They became hyper-aware of the macroeconomic trap.
The confession of future stimulus completely ruined its effectiveness.
They saw right through the illusion of free money. And when the government implemented spending that wasn't expected, it created massive anxiety.
It signaled to the public, like, things are much worse than we thought. The government is panicking.
So the unexpected stimulus actually triggers a defensive reaction. Consumers pull back their private spending even further.
And businesses freeze their hiring out of fear.
Right. And that contraction is actually larger than the government's injection. Hence, the economy shrinks. Negative 0.23.
It's like a magic trick performed for an audience that has already memorized the Illusionist Handbook.
Perfect analogy.
The magician pulls the rabbit out of the hat, and instead of clapping, the audience just groans because they can see the trapdoor.
Yeah, exact.
But, the public's reaction wasn't just a flat line for 30 years. To prove that no economic truth lives forever, the authors took the data and chopped it up into 10-year rolling windows.
The rolling window approach is crucial to watch the disease mutate over time.
Right. They wanted to see how the multiplier shifted decade by decade, and the timeline reads like a tragedy of false hopes.
Let's look at the late 80s and early 90s. The Japanese asset price bubble.
Oh, man. Real estate in Tokyo was supposedly worth more than all of California.
It was wild. But why did government stimulus fail so spectacularly during that specific window?
Because the economy was historically overheated, right?
Yes. As we discussed with the ice and fire dynamic, pumping government cash into an economy with zero idle resources is futile. During the bubble, unemployment was practically non-existent. Every factory was humming.
So any government spending just violently crowds out private investment. We get that. But then, I'm looking further down the timeline. Between 2003 and 2012, there was this weird, massive spike in the data.
Yeah, the multiplier suddenly rebounded.
Depending on the metric, it hit a peak of 4.45.
That's right.
I mean, if I'm a policymaker looking at a 4.45 multiplier, I'm popping champagne. I'm like, we fixed it. The magic is back. Was Japan finally out of the woods?
I really have to crush that optimism.
No.
A 4.45 multiplier in the 2000s wasn't a sign of a healing economy. It was the tragic, delayed result of accumulating massive amounts of idle, rotting resources over the previous decade.
Wait, walk me through that. Why is a high multiplier a bad thing here?
Well, by the early 2000s, Japan had endured over a decade of stagnation. Companies had hoarded cash and refused to invest. Factories had been shuttered or were running at half speed. There was a tremendous amount of hidden slack in the system.
Oh, okay.
So much unused human and industrial potential had built up that any spark created a massive localized fire.
It wasn't a robust, healthy engine roaring to life. It was like pouring gasoline onto a massive pile of dry, dead brush. It flares up spectacularly, but it burns out instantly.
Exactly. A high multiplier in this context is an indictment of how much economic potential the country had allowed to decay. The baseline was deeply depressed.
So the government spending finally found resources to mobilize, but only because the private sector had completely abandoned them for a decade.
It shows how a single statistic can completely lie to you if you don't understand the physical reality beneath it.
Which leads us to Honestly, the most fascinating part of this deep dive, the invisible killers.
Yes.
Because if we know the public was hoarding money, and the timing was often wrong, we still need to identify the active assassins that were murdering Japan's fiscal potential behind the scenes.
And these are the exact same assassins lurking in modern economies today.
Killer number one, the central bank.
Right. Fiscal policy, the government taxing and spending, shares the steering wheel with monetary policy, which is controlled by the central bank. In this case, the Bank of Japan or the BOJ.
The dynamic between the Japanese government and the Bank of Japan during this era was incredibly toxic, wasn't it?
To understand it, you have to realize that for most of the period since the mid-90s, the BOJ was traumatized by the bubble of the 80s.
They were absolutely terrified of inflation.
Right.
Wait, but the entire country was trapped in a deflationary spiral. Prices were dropping, real wages were stagnating, which is terrible for debt burdens. But the central bank was still paranoid about inflation returning.
They were fighting the ghosts of the past. The BOJ adopted this unyielding posture. At the very slightest hint of rising inflation, they signaled they would immediately raise interest rates to choke it off.
So imagine the government passes a massive stimulus bill. They borrow billions to build infrastructure, trying to create demand, get businesses hiring, and intentionally generate a little bit of healthy inflation to break the deflationary spiral.
They are slamming their foot on the gas pedal.
But the financial markets understand the BOJ's trauma.
Yes. The corporate sector looks at the stimulus and says, if this government spending actually works, it will create inflation. And the second inflation ticks up, the Bank of Japan will instantly raise interest rates.
And higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive, which immediately kills corporate expansion.
So they are driving the car with one foot slamming the gas and the other foot hovering over the brake.
And the craziest part of the paper is that the BOJ didn't even have to actually press the brake to kill the stimulus.
No, the invisible threat alone was enough. This is forward guidance acting as a weapon.
Wow.
The mere anticipation of an offsetting response by the central bank caused private expectations to tighten immediately. Businesses refused to expand because they anticipated the rate hike.
The threat neutralized the government stimulus before the money even cleared the bank.
Exactly.
So if the stimulus wasn't creating growth and it was being neutralized by central bank fears, where was the money actually going? I mean, someone was cashing those trillion-yen checks.
That brings us to killer number 2, the zombie corporations.
The zombies. This is perhaps the most damaging structural legacy of the Japanese stagnation. The paper references the seminal work by Caballero, Hoshi, and Kashop on the zombie phenomenon.
The parasitic enterprises. Let's explain the mechanics of how a company becomes a zombie.
Yeah, please do.
So, to have a functioning capitalist economy, you must allow creative destruction. When a market evolves, poorly run, obsolete, or over-leveraged companies are supposed to go bankrupt.
It is painful in the short term, but bankruptcy frees up their capital, their office space, and their talent to be absorbed by new, innovative startups.
Exactly. It's like a hospital.
Yeah, you have a young, healthy patient who needs a routine surgery to go on and live a highly productive life.
But the hospital refuses to give them any blood because they are pumping their entire blood supply into a corpse just to keep its cheeks pink.
That is a vivid and completely accurate analogy. In Japan, the government and the major banks refused to let the dead wood burn.
They were terrified of the social fallout of mass bankruptcies and localized unemployment. So they engaged in zombie lending.
Why would a bank willingly lend money to a dead company?
Because of mutual hostage-taking. If the massive company goes bankrupt, the bank has to officially recognize the massive loss on its own balance sheet.
Which might cause the bank itself to fail.
Right. So the bank rolls over the bad debt. They pump continuous lines of credit, often subsidized by the government's fiscal stimulus, into insolvent companies, just so those companies can make the interest payments on their previous loans.
Wow. They kept the zombies walking just to make the accounting ledgers look solvent.
And by pumping all that financial blood into dead companies, they starved the healthy parts of the economy.
A dynamic new software startup couldn't get a business loan or couldn't find available engineers because the banks were too busy throwing billions of yen into a failing 19th century conglomerate to keep it from collapsing.
It turned the government stimulus into a literal poison.
The money wasn't a catalyst. It prolonged the suffering, blocked the restructuring of resources, and suffocated innovation.
You are taxing your most productive citizens to artificially sustain your most unproductive ones. It locks the entire nation into a state of suspended animation.
Which brings up the final mind-bending statistical illusion in the paper. Killer number 3, the hallucination of unemployment.
This one is huge.
Because if you looked at Japan's official unemployment rate throughout this entire 30-year nightmare, it rarely tops 6%.
To an American or European economist, a 5 or 6% peak unemployment rate during a lost decade sounds like an absolute miracle. It looks incredible on paper.
It does. If unemployment is that low, a casual observer would say, what's the big deal? Everyone has a job. The economy can't be that bad.
But the authors emphasize that this low unemployment was a complete statistical hallucination.
Wait, how?
The official unemployment rate in Japan was highly insensitive to the actual devastation happening in the economic cycle.
Explain the mechanics of that. If a zombie company is barely surviving, how are they not firing people?
It goes back to the cultural structure of Japanese labor, specifically the lifetime employment guarantees at major corporations.
No.
Even when these companies lost massive market share and had literally no work for their employees to do, they didn't officially lay them off. They created what were known as window-gazing jobs.
Window-gazing?
Yes. Employees would come to the office, sit at a desk, and look out the window. They were technically employed, still receiving a paycheck, which, remember, was being subsidized by those zombie loans.
But their economic output was exactly zero?
It was massive labor hoarding.
So on paper they are employed, but economically they are entirely idle.
Furthermore, you have to look at who dropped out of the labor force entirely. During this era, many marginalized workers, particularly women in the Japanese corporate structure, simply stopped looking for work when the economy stagnated.
And here's the trick of the unemployment statistic, right? If you stop actively looking for a job, you are no longer counted as unemployed.
Exactly. You just vanish from the data.
So because policymakers were relying on this deeply flawed, blinded data, they completely misjudged the immense amount of hidden idle capacity in their society.
They prescribed medicine based on fake lab results.
Right. If the data tells the prime minister that unemployment is low, the prime minister assumes the economy is operating near its full capacity.
Therefore, they designed fiscal policies suited for a healthy, tight economy, completely missing the fact that millions of people are economically stagnant and waiting to be mobilized.
Bad data guarantees catastrophic policy failure.
Every single time.
This brings us out of the 90s and crashing directly into the present day.
Yeah.
Because, this deep dive is not just a history lesson about an island in the Pacific.
No, it is a glaring warning siren for the entire developed world.
If we look at the macro global picture today, what do we see? We see skyrocketing national debt to GDP ratios across almost all major Western economies.
We see rapidly aging populations, the exact same demographic cliff Japan fell off 30 years ago.
We see stagnant real innovation being masked by massive central bank interventions.
And we have to look at this purely mathematically. We are not taking political sides on the endless ideological debate of austerity versus government spending.
Right. Impartial analysis.
The math in this paper suggests a chilling objective reality. When an economy hits the boundaries of severe demographic decline, when it is saturated with massive structural debt burdens, and when the public becomes highly attuned to future tax liabilities,
traditional stimulus simply stops working.
it stops being an investment in the future.
It becomes a loan stolen from the future with a negative return on investment in the present.
Exactly.
I want to ask you, the listener, to look around your own country's economy right now, today. Do you see zombie companies being bailed out because governments are too afraid of the political cost to let them fail?
Do you see central banks fighting against government spending policies, caught in a massive tug of war over interest rates and inflation?
Are we currently standing on the ruins of 30 years of Japanese economic history, doomed to repeat the exact same mistakes because we refuse to read the data?
The ghost of the Heisei era is not confined to Tokyo. It is wandering the treasury departments of Europe and North America right now.
We've covered incredible ground today. We started with the shocking reality of a 0.27 fiscal multiplier, the magic ATM that vaporizes 73 cents of every dollar.
We tore apart the diagnostic failure of economic models that force reality onto rigid train tracks.
We unpacked the curse of public expectations, where a smart public hoards cash to pay for tomorrow's taxes, driving the multiplier into the negative.
And we revealed the invisible assassins. The central bank's inflation paranoia, the parasitic zombie corporations keeping the dead alive, and the statistical hallucination of low unemployment that blinded the policymakers.
It is a masterclass in how systemic failure happens slowly and then all at once.
It really is.
But before we sign off, I know you always have one final string to pull. What is the lingering thought we should take away from all this?
So the paper explicitly details how the anticipation of policy neuters its effect. The public saw the OECD forecasts and hoarded their cash.
Right.
But if we extrapolate that into our current hyper-modern reality, what if the era of macroeconomic management, as we've known it since the mid-20th century, is simply over?
Over entirely.
Think about the mechanics of our world today. Our global financial systems are hyper-connected. We don't wait for a quarterly IMF forecast to be printed in a newspaper.
No, we have instant real-time data on the supercomputers in our pockets.
We have algorithmic trading reading sentiment on social media in milliseconds. What if the very act of a government trying to manipulate an economy immediately triggers a defensive reaction from the public and the markets that neutralizes it before the ink on the legislation is even dry?
Oh, wow. So the smarter, faster, and more connected the public gets, the weaker the government's tools become.
If the magic of Keynesian stimulus relies on catching the economy by surprise to jolt it into action, how do you generate a surprise in an era where everyone sees everything, all the time?
You can't.
It suggests that the levers of power economists have relied on for decades might now be permanently disconnected from the machine.
Which means we might all be standing in front of that broken ATM, and no matter how many buttons the politicians push, the machine is never going to give us back our dollar.
That is exactly the implication.
That is a terrifying, mind-bending thought to end on. I encourage you to look at the financial news differently this week. When you see a government announce a massive new spending package, keep an eye out for those zombie stats. Look for the central bank tug-of-war and ask yourself, who is actually paying for this? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.